Every year there are some incredible stories in college football, and now as we approach the 2024 NFL Draft, some of these stories get to be brought to the light. Every year there are prospects who pretty much had no chance of being where they are. One such example is the rise of Cooper DeJean. He has been a superstar for the Iowa Hawkeyes over the last few years, and comes from a town with less than 1,000 people. The odds of him ever making it to college football, yet alone the NFL, are pretty astronomical, and that negates the fact that he's going to be a first-round pick. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So how did Cooper DeJean get to this point? How did he go from a town with less than 1,000 people to now a lock for the first round in this year's draft? Well, today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his story, his recruitment, his career at Iowa, and his future in the NFL. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football and the NFL Draft, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what prospect I should cover next. So be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss another one, and please let me know another player you want me to cover before the draft. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the incredible rise of Cooper DeJean. In order to understand how DeJean got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He was born in the city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but would eventually move to a small town in northwestern Iowa. It had just under 1,000 people, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I don't really want to get roasted down in the comment section below. From there, he would end up attending a high school that was consolidated. What does that mean? Well, it means it was a single school for 3 or 4 other towns. There just weren't enough kids from each town to justify having a high school, so that's the kind of environment he grew up in. But he did have some good genetics in his family tree. Both of his parents were collegiate athletes, as his dad was a basketball player for Huron University in South Dakota, and his mom was a softball player who played at Briar Cliff before she also transferred to Huron. I assume that's where the two met. Cooper was not the only athlete in his family either, as both of his younger brothers played sports for his high school. Athletics had always been part of DeJean's life, even long before he got into playing competitive sports. While he did go to a very tiny high school, he did not have a very tiny future, as his extreme athleticism was apparent from a very young age. The reason they could see it is because a lot of those schools don't have the most high-class athletes in the world. Since it was such a small school, he ended up playing pretty much every sport, and he dominated. In basketball, he finished his 4-year career with nearly 2,000 points, and that put himself up with elite company, like other Iowa kids in TJ Hawkinson and Harrison Barnes. Basketball was actually his first love, and he would travel across the country playing AAU basketball, and he really enjoyed it. His second sport was track, and his speed was always apparent. But he also had more than just speed, and he was also a 3-year letterman in varsity baseball. Obviously he was good, but his main sport was football. As a sophomore, he would play wide receiver, and had more than 1,000 yards receiving. He also played some defensive back and punter, and it was at this time he started to move away from basketball and go towards football. In 2019, he would have his recruiting breakthrough as Iowa would start to go after him. He played both quarterback and defensive back and led his team to a state championship in the 2A division. According to 24/7 Sports, who tracked his junior year statistics, he made an impact everywhere. He had 3,546 passing yards, 42 touchdowns, 1,292 rushing yards, 24 rushing touchdowns, 34 tackles, 5 interceptions, and 2 pick sixes. He also had 2 punt returns, and his high school coach said, quote, "He's just a competitor. It doesn't matter if it's basketball or football or track or whatever, he's kind of that kid that wants the ball in his hand. He wants to be controlled, and that probably makes him such a great player." By the time Cooper was a senior in 2020, he had racked up a small list of collegiate offers, which included Iowa, Iowa State, North Dakota State, and South Dakota State. He also had a walk-on opportunity with Virginia, but despite earning a 3-star rating, he only had those 4 offers. Iowa head coach Kirk Ferentz said, quote, "The most amazing part is he wasn't recruited, especially in this day and age where there are no secrets. This may have been because of the small size of the school and the different competition he was playing, but what's interesting is that most schools actually recruited him to play quarterback. Iowa, though, saw him as a defensive back, and he was never really interested in playing that at the collegiate level, but that's where Iowa wanted him. They were enamored with his mixture of size, speed, and ball skills, and they wanted him to replace Amani Hooker, who had just gone off to the NFL. In fact, his experience at quarterback was very attractive to Iowa, who thought he'd be able to know how a quarterback would think, and then be able to utilize that on the defensive side of the ball. He said, quote, "Iowa never really mentioned quarterback. They thought I would be a better defensive back." In terms of recruiting, Iowa made a full court press on him, as they wanted to make sure he stayed in state, and no one else really found out about him. They also didn't want the rival Iowa State to get their hands on him, and he decided to commit to the Hawkeyes in 2020, citing the long-term success of Kirk Ferentz. At the time he was committed, he was rated as a 3-star recruit, but would eventually be raised to a 4-star recruit. He put up that insane stat line I talked about earlier, and he also led them to a 13-0 season, winning every single game by over 20 points. DeJean was a guy who went from a consolidated high school to someone who was all over the record books. But would his position change actually work in college? That's what people were wondering. Cooper's first season at Iowa was in 2021, and it was an interesting one. He ended up making some plays on the scout team, and had some defensive snaps, but mostly would play on special teams. He did take one kick return for 20 yards, but managed to make an impact playing other positions during kick returns due to his insane work ethic and his push for any sort of playing time. His strength coach said, quote, "He's genetically blessed. He brings it every single day in the weight room, and he's extremely serious and focused when it comes to training." The following season, the question wasn't whether he would play, but rather what position he would play. With the two safeties in front of him both eventually going to the NFL, that position group was now up for him to take. He said, quote, "Last year I didn't know much when I was on the field. Eventually he would end up getting on the field, and he became a big-time starter for them. In 2022, he recorded 75 total tackles with 5 total interceptions. Of those 5, he actually returned 3 of them for touchdowns, and he also returned 10 punts. After 2022 was when the hype for Cooper DeJean really started to get real. This past season when he was a junior, he became the uncontested starter and leader of the Hawkeye defense, but he's also getting preseason props as one of the most electric players in college football. He ended up completely proving it, as he earned consensus All-American honors and is now projected as a first-round pick. Despite missing the final 4 games of the season, he ended up finishing with 41 tackles and 2 interceptions. He also had a punt return touchdown, and he really should have had 2. Personally, I think that whole Minnesota situation was stupid, as he was obviously not signaling for a fair catch and was instead pointing his teammates to block for him, but I guess by the hair-splitting definition of the legal rules in college football, it technically crossed the line. Whatever. While that play was extremely frustrating for Iowa fans, that did not hurt his first-round chances. Some Iowa coaches think he could be the best player that they've ever coached, and Ferentz said, quote, "And I was thinking about it last week, I'm sure he's one of the best players that I've ever been around at any level. DeJean is now a household name in terms of football, but what's going to happen to him now? Well, the consensus is that he's a first-round pick. There are some that say he could be a second-rounder, but his size and speed make him an excellent option for at least 3 positions. He could play safety, corner, and nickel, and then the fact that you can plug him on special teams, or maybe even on offense occasionally, makes him extremely desirable, and he's basically one of those Swiss Army knife players that can do a bit of everything. Cooper has shown he can do all of that stuff at a high level, and brings extreme versatility to the NFL, so while I can't give a great prediction or comparison for him, I just think he's sort of a unicorn-type player that can really be plugged in and succeed anywhere. The only knock on him is maybe you could say he doesn't have a ton of experience, as he's really only started for a year and a half, but I'm honestly not too worried about that. DeJean has excelled at everything he's done, and his story is honestly extremely wild. He went from a consolidated high school, was a star at 4 sports, was one of the best kept secrets in recruiting that season, excelled at everything at Iowa, and now will be a first-round pick. He definitely is one of the best stories in this year's draft, but what do you guys think? If you're an Iowa or NFL fan, what do you think of Cooper DeJean? How do you think he will fit in the NFL? And what prospect should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.